The moment a badge stops seeing a person, justice begins keeping score. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet suburban street in Fairfax County, Virginia, where trimmed hedges, neatly painted porches, and fluttering American flags painted the picture of an ordinary Saturday. Children laughed somewhere down the block, a lawn mower hummed in the distance, and neighbors exchanged casual waves while carrying groceries home. Standing on the wide wooden porch of a modest brick house, Nathaniel Brooks adjusted the small package he had just accepted from a delivery driver. At 52, he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than visible authority. His navy polo shirt, tan khakis, and polished brown loafers made him look like any other homeowner enjoying a peaceful weekend. His salt and pepper beard was carefully trimmed, his posture relaxed, and his calm brown eyes reflected the kind of patience earned through decades of discipline instead of privilege. Nothing about him demanded attention, and perhaps that was exactly why what happened next unfolded the way it did. The sharp growl of a police cruiser interrupted the calm as it rolled to a stop in front of Nathaniel's house. Officer Tyler McKenna stepped out quickly, scanning the property with narrowed blue eyes before resting them on the man standing quietly on the porch. Tyler had answered a dispatch call reporting a suspicious individual lingering near the residence. The description had been vague, based entirely on a nervous caller who believed someone did not belong in the neighborhood. Instead of slowing down and confirming the facts, Tyler trusted the assumption already forming in his mind. He walked briskly across the front yard, one hand resting near his duty belt while his expression hardened with certainty. Nathaniel looked up, slightly surprised but remaining completely composed. "Good afternoon, officer," he said evenly. "Can I help you?" Tyler ignored the greeting. "Step away from the front door and keep your hands where I can see them." Nathaniel complied immediately, raising his empty hands without argument. "This is my home," he answered calmly. "If there's been some misunderstanding, I'm happy to clear it up." Tyler barely acknowledged the explanation. His eyes moved across the porch, the package, the front door, then back to Nathaniel's face as though he had already reached a conclusion before hearing a single complete sentence. Across the street, Grace Holloway looked up from watering her flower beds. She recognized Nathaniel instantly. They had been neighbors for years, sharing holiday cookies, neighborhood meetings, and quiet conversations over morning coffee. Confusion crossed her face as she watched the officer continue forward with increasing confidence while Nathaniel remained perfectly still. Another curtain shifted in a nearby house. A teenager walking his dog slowed to watch. Within moments, several phones quietly appeared, recording what no one expected to witness on such a peaceful afternoon. Tyler instructed Nathaniel to turn around. Nathaniel maintained the same measured tone. "Officer, before we go any further, I would appreciate the opportunity to identify myself." "You'll have plenty of time for that," Tyler replied firmly. "Right now, you're being detained while I sort this out." Nathaniel offered no resistance. He slowly turned as instructed, his expression remaining remarkably calm despite the growing audience. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed softly across the otherwise quiet neighborhood, followed by an uncomfortable silence that seemed louder than any argument could have been. Grace lowered her watering hose, unable to believe what she was seeing. Nathaniel simply looked toward the street, breathing steadily as though he understood something no one else did. Then, almost unnoticed beneath the distant sound of approaching traffic, 3 dark government SUVs turned onto the block and began heading directly toward his house. Nathaniel Brooks stood quietly on the weathered porch steps with his hands secured behind his back, his breathing steady and his expression unchanged despite the growing circle of curious eyes surrounding his front yard. Officer Tyler McKenna remained convinced that he had acted appropriately. The dispatch call had described a suspicious individual outside a residence. And although Nathaniel had calmly explained more than once that he lived there, Tyler believed experience mattered more than explanation. "If this is your house, then proving it should not be difficult," Tyler said in a firm voice that carried across the street. Nathaniel nodded slightly. "I agree, officer. That is exactly why I asked you to verify my identification before placing me in handcuffs." Tyler dismissed the comment with a brief shake of his head. People say a lot of things when they are stopped. Across the street, Grace Holloway could no longer remain silent. She stepped off the curb carefully, still holding the garden gloves she had been wearing moments earlier. "Officer, I have lived here for almost 20 years, she called respectfully. "That man is my neighbor. He has owned that house for years." Tyler glanced toward her but did not change his posture. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but please remain on the sidewalk while I complete my investigation." Grace hesitated, surprised that her statement had been brushed aside so quickly. The teenager walking his golden retriever quietly continued recording on his phone, while another neighbor whispered that something about the situation did not feel right. Nathaniel looked toward Grace and offered a reassuring smile. "It is all right," he said gently. "Let the process play out." His calmness only deepened the uncomfortable silence. Most people expected frustration, fear, or anger from someone being detained in front of his own home. Instead, Nathaniel stood with remarkable composure, almost as though he trusted that facts would eventually speak louder than assumptions. Tyler noticed the unusual confidence but interpreted it differently. In his mind, confidence could simply mean someone believed they could talk their way out of trouble. He reached for his portable radio and requested additional verification from dispatch, asking whether any registered homeowner information matched the address. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. No one spoke while everyone waited for the response. Even the neighborhood seemed to fall unnaturally quiet. Then the radio crackled to life, but before dispatch could finish speaking, Tyler's attention shifted toward the end of the street. 3 black sport utility vehicles with discrete government license plates turned the corner and slowed as they approached the house. The engines remained almost silent, yet every person watching instinctively looked in the same direction. Grace frowned. She had never seen vehicles like those in the neighborhood before. Tyler narrowed his eyes, uncertain whether they were connected to the situation or merely passing through. Nathaniel simply watched them approach without the slightest hint of surprise. The first vehicle came to a smooth stop directly in front of the property. Before anyone said another word, the driver's door opened, and a sharply dressed man in a dark navy suit stepped onto the pavement, scanned the scene once, locked eyes with Nathaniel, and immediately changed the expression on his face. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to serious responsibility rather than public attention. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a crisp white shirt and dark tie, Marcus Ellison walked toward the porch without rushing, his eyes carefully taking in every detail before speaking. He noticed Nathaniel standing calmly with his hands restrained. He noticed Officer Tyler McKenna maintaining a defensive posture. He noticed several neighbors recording the encounter. Most importantly, he noticed the expression on Nathaniel's face, which remained remarkably composed despite everything unfolding around him. Tyler stepped forward before Marcus could reach the porch. "Sir, this is an active police investigation. I need you to remain where you are." Marcus stopped politely and offered a professional nod. "Good afternoon, officer. My name is Marcus Ellison. I would like to understand what is happening here." Tyler answered without hesitation. "We received a report of suspicious activity. The individual is being temporarily detained while we verify his identity." Marcus looked directly at Nathaniel. "Have you been given an opportunity to present identification?" Nathaniel answered with the same calm voice everyone had heard. "Since the beginning. I requested that opportunity several times." Marcus paused for a brief moment before turning back toward Tyler. "Was that request denied?" Tyler folded his arms. "I made a judgment based on the circumstances presented to me." The answer hung heavily in the afternoon air. Grace Holloway exchanged worried glances with another neighbor. Even those who had remained silent now seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Something about Marcus's measured question suggested that this conversation was heading somewhere completely unexpected. Tyler could feel the attention shifting away from him, yet he refused to reconsider his decision. He believed that backing down too quickly would signal uncertainty, and uncertainty was something he had always been taught to avoid while wearing the badge. Nathaniel, meanwhile, simply watched the exchange unfold without interrupting. He neither challenged the officer nor attempted to influence Marcus. His patience seemed almost impossible to understand. Then Marcus reached inside his suit jacket. Tyler instinctively straightened, his hand remaining near his duty belt as several neighbors quietly held their breath. Instead of producing anything alarming, Marcus slowly removed a leather credential wallet and held it open where Tyler could clearly examine it without stepping closer. Tyler studied the identification for several seconds. The seal was unmistakably federal. His confident expression softened ever so slightly, though he quickly recovered. "Even so," Tyler replied, "my investigation is not finished." Marcus closed the credential wallet and slipped it back into his jacket. "I understand the importance of completing an investigation," he said evenly. "I also understand the importance of verifying facts before reaching conclusions." Those words landed with unusual weight. Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly, almost as though he had expected that exact sentence. Grace noticed it too. The teenager filming whispered under his breath that this situation was becoming stranger by the minute. A second man exited one of the government vehicles carrying a slim black portfolio while quietly speaking into an earpiece. 2. Additional officials remained near the driveway, observing without interfering. Their disciplined restraint contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding the porch. Tyler suddenly realized that none of them appeared surprised to find Nathaniel standing exactly where he was. Before he could ask another question, the second official opened the portfolio, glanced at its contents, looked toward Marcus, and spoke just loudly enough for everyone standing nearby to hear, "Sir, the court requested immediate confirmation once we located Judge Brooks." The word settled over the quiet neighborhood with almost unbelievable weight. Judge Brooks. For a brief second, nobody moved. Even the breeze seemed to disappear as every pair of eyes shifted from the federal official to Nathaniel Brooks, who remained exactly where he had been standing since the patrol car first arrived. Officer Tyler McKenna frowned, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. "Judge," he repeated cautiously. The second official looked up from the portfolio without hesitation. "Federal Magistrate Nathaniel Brooks," he answered in a calm, professional tone. "He is scheduled to participate in a judicial conference later this afternoon, and we were instructed to locate him after repeated calls went unanswered." Grace Holloway slowly placed a hand over her mouth. The teenager recording lowered his phone for just a moment before quickly lifting it again, realizing that what had started as an ordinary neighborhood encounter had suddenly become something entirely different. Tyler looked toward Nathaniel for the first time without the certainty that had guided every decision until now. "If that is true," he said carefully, "why did you not simply tell me?" Nathaniel met his eyes with the same composed expression he had maintained from the beginning. "Officer, I did attempt to explain who I was. More importantly, I asked more than once if you would verify my identification before making assumptions. I believed allowing the process to unfold calmly was the most responsible choice." His answer carried no anger, no sarcasm, and no attempt to embarrass anyone. That unexpected restraint made the silence around them even heavier. Marcus Ellison stepped forward just enough to stand beside Nathaniel without crossing into the officer's personal space. "Judge Brooks has served the federal judiciary with distinction for many years," he said evenly. "He understands better than most that lawful authority depends upon careful verification rather than quick conclusions." Tyler swallowed quietly. For the first time since arriving, doubt began replacing confidence. He replayed every moment in his mind. Nathaniel had complied with every instruction. He had never argued. He had never refused to cooperate. He had simply asked to be identified properly. That realization settled uncomfortably as Tyler glanced toward the neighbors who had witnessed the entire exchange. Several were still recording, but nobody was speaking anymore. Then Tyler's portable radio crackled again. Dispatch returned with the homeowner verification that had been delayed moments earlier. "Unit 12, property records confirm the registered homeowner at your location is Nathaniel Brooks. The dispatcher paused briefly before continuing. Additional records indicate no outstanding warrants and no active investigative alerts associated with the resident. Tyler closed his eyes for the briefest moment. The confirmation had arrived only minutes too late, yet those few minutes had changed everything. Before anyone could respond, another vehicle entered the street, this time displaying clear markings from the county police department. Sergeant Daniel Foster stepped out with a measured stride after receiving notification that federal officials had become involved in the encounter. He surveyed the gathering, recognized Marcus immediately, then looked toward Nathaniel with visible surprise before turning his attention to Tyler. "Officer McKenna," he said calmly, "I need a complete explanation of what happened here before anyone takes another step." Tyler opened his mouth to answer, but Nathaniel quietly spoke first. "Sergeant, I believe the facts will become much clearer once everyone has had an opportunity to review the body camera recording from the very beginning." Sergeant Daniel Foster gave a slow nod as Nathaniel finished speaking. There was no accusation in the federal magistrate's voice, only a quiet confidence that the facts would speak for themselves. Foster had spent more than 2 decades in law enforcement, and experience had taught him that calm people often carried the strongest evidence. He looked toward Officer Tyler McKenna. "Before we discuss anything else," he said evenly, "remove the handcuffs." Tyler hesitated for only a fraction of a second before complying. The metallic click echoed across the porch as Nathaniel's hands were finally free. Nathaniel rubbed one wrist briefly, not in anger but simply to restore circulation, then folded his hands comfortably in front of him. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. "I appreciate your professionalism." The response caught Tyler off guard. He had expected frustration, perhaps even a lecture. Instead, Nathaniel treated him with the same measured respect he had shown from the very beginning. Grace Holloway quietly shook her head. "He has been respectful this entire time," she said softly, loud enough for Foster to hear. "Every single minute." Foster acknowledged her statement with a slight nod before turning back to Tyler. "Did he resist any lawful instruction?" Tyler answered honestly. "No, Sergeant." "Did he refuse to identify himself?" Tyler paused. "He requested the opportunity several times." The words sounded very different now than they had only minutes earlier. Marcus Ellison remained silent, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. He understood that accountability carried more weight when people reached their own conclusions instead of having them imposed. Foster took out a small notepad and calmly recorded several details while another county officer arrived to secure the immediate scene. The growing crowd remained orderly, although the atmosphere had changed completely. Curiosity had given way to reflection. Several neighbors quietly lowered their phones, realizing they were witnessing something more significant than a simple misunderstanding. Then Foster asked a question that immediately shifted everyone's attention. "Officer McKenna, at what point did you verify ownership of the property?" "Before deciding to detain Mr. Brooks." Tyler looked toward the porch, then toward the patrol car parked along the curb. He searched his memory carefully because he knew accuracy now mattered more than confidence. Finally he answered in a noticeably quieter voice. "I relied on the dispatch information regarding the suspicious person call. I did not confirm the homeowner information before initiating the detention." Foster wrote another note without commenting. That silence somehow carried more weight than criticism. Tyler felt every passing second becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Nathaniel noticed the young officer's expression and spoke gently. "Sergeant, I would respectfully ask that everyone remember something important. Mistakes deserve to be examined carefully, but assumptions should never replace evidence." Marcus glanced toward Nathaniel with quiet admiration. Even after everything that had happened, the federal magistrate continued speaking about principles instead of personal offense. That alone left a visible impression on several officers standing nearby. At that exact moment another county vehicle pulled onto the street. A police lieutenant stepped out carrying a department-issued tablet. He walked directly toward Sergeant Foster and spoke in a voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Foster read the information on the screen once, then looked up at Tyler with an expression that changed almost instantly. Without saying a word, he slowly turned the tablet so Tyler could see it for himself, and the color immediately drained from the young officer's face. Tyler stared at the tablet without speaking. The screen displayed a secure departmental notification confirming that Federal Magistrate Nathaniel Brooks had been scheduled to preside over a regional judicial training conference the following Monday, an event attended by judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement leaders from across the district. Attached beneath the notice was an official portrait identical to the man standing only a few feet away on his own front porch. There was no uncertainty left. Sergeant Daniel Foster slowly lowered the tablet and drew a measured breath before addressing everyone present. This information confirms Judge Brooks's identity beyond question. His voice remained calm, but its firmness left no room for misunderstanding. Tyler felt the weight of every decision he had made settling on his shoulders. He looked toward Nathaniel, searching for anger, disappointment, or even satisfaction. Instead he found only the same steady expression that had been there since the patrol car first stopped in front of the house. Nathaniel spoke quietly. "Officer McKenna, I understand that responding officers often face incomplete information. The responsibility that comes with that reality is to verify before reaching conclusions." Tyler lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." It was the first time he had addressed Nathaniel with the respect his position deserved, yet the words carried another meaning as well. They acknowledged the dignity that should have been recognized from the very beginning, regardless of title. Marcus Ellison glanced toward Sergeant Foster before speaking. "Judge Brooks has spent years teaching that public trust is built one encounter at a time. Every interaction matters because citizens remember how they were treated long after paperwork is filed." Grace Holloway quietly nodded. She remembered how Nathaniel had volunteered at neighborhood meetings, helped young students prepare for mock trial competitions, and greeted everyone with kindness regardless of who they were. None of those neighbors had known the full extent of his professional responsibilities because Nathaniel had never introduced himself by his position. He had simply been their neighbor. A brief vibration interrupted the silence as Foster's department radio received another message. He listened carefully, then acknowledged the transmission. When he looked back toward Tyler, his expression became even more serious. "The communications center has located the original emergency call," he said. The caller reported that a man was standing on a porch and claimed he looked out of place in the neighborhood. No criminal conduct was described. Those words settled over the gathering like a heavy cloud. Several neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. The teenager, still recording, slowly lowered his phone again. Tyler replayed the dispatch in his memory and realized how much he had filled in on his own before ever speaking with Nathaniel. The realization struck harder than any formal correction could have. Nathaniel noticed the silence and spoke once more. "Assumptions can travel much faster than facts. That is why patience is one of the most important tools any public servant can carry." Marcus looked toward the federal vehicles parked along the curb. "Judge, the conference coordinator has been informed that you were delayed. They are standing by." Nathaniel nodded politely but made no move toward the waiting vehicles. Instead he remained where he was, looking calmly at Tyler as though there was still one unfinished conversation left to have. Before anyone could speak again, Sergeant Foster's phone rang. He listened for several seconds, thanked the caller, then slowly looked up. "Officer McKenna," he said in a measured voice, "Internal Affairs has requested that your body camera footage be preserved immediately because they have identified another recent complaint that may need to be reviewed alongside today's incident." The words from Internal Affairs lingered in the air long after Sergeant Daniel Foster lowered his phone. Officer Tyler McKenna stood motionless beside his patrol vehicle, no longer focused on Nathaniel Brooks but on the growing realization that this afternoon would not simply end with an apology. Foster approached him with the calm professionalism expected of a supervisor. "Officer McKenna," he said evenly, "effective immediately, your body camera recording, patrol vehicle video, dispatch communications, and incident notes are to be preserved without alteration." You are not being asked to explain anything further until the review process begins. Tyler gave a slow nod. Yes, Sergeant. His voice lacked the confidence it had carried only minutes earlier. Foster then addressed one of the assisting officers. Please arrange transportation for Officer McKenna back to the precinct after we finish documenting the scene. His patrol responsibilities for the remainder of the shift are concluded. No raised voices followed. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. The quiet formality of the process somehow felt even more significant than public criticism. Nathaniel watched the exchange without satisfaction or resentment. He had spent decades inside courtrooms where he learned that accountability carried greater weight when it was measured instead of emotional. Marcus Ellison stepped beside him. Judge Brooks, would you like us to leave? Nathaniel looked across the neighborhood before answering. Several families were still standing outside their homes. Grace Holloway remained near the sidewalk. The teenager who had recorded nearly everything lowered his phone completely, uncertain whether he should continue filming. Nathaniel smiled gently. Not yet, he replied. There is something every person here deserves to hear. Marcus gave a respectful nod and stepped back. Foster noticed the request and quietly signaled the officers to pause where they were. Even Tyler looked up, curious about what Nathaniel intended to say. The federal magistrate walked slowly to the edge of his porch, resting one hand lightly on the wooden railing. His voice remained calm, carrying naturally across the quiet street. Most people believe justice begins inside a courtroom, he said. In reality, it often begins much earlier. It begins with the first question an officer asks, the first assumption a neighbor makes, and the first opportunity someone has to listen instead of deciding. The neighborhood became completely silent. Nathaniel continued. Today was not only about me. Tomorrow it could be someone else standing where I stood. Someone without a title, without professional connections, and without federal colleagues arriving a few minutes later. Every citizen deserves the same patience, the same respect, and the same careful attention to facts. Grace slowly wiped a tear from her eye. Several neighbors quietly nodded in agreement. Even the officers listening nearby appeared thoughtful. Tyler found himself unable to look away. Nathaniel had every opportunity to embarrass him publicly, yet instead he had chosen to focus on principles rather than personal victory. That decision left a deeper impression than any reprimand could have. Foster quietly approached Nathaniel after he finished speaking. Judge Brooks, he said respectfully, thank you for handling this with extraordinary professionalism. Nathaniel answered with a small smile. Professionalism matters most when emotions are highest, Sergeant. At that exact moment Marcus's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his expression becoming noticeably more serious before he looked toward Nathaniel. Judge, he said carefully, the Administrative Office of the United States Courts has already been informed about today's incident, and they are requesting to speak with you before the official departmental review even begins. Marcus Ellison stepped a few feet away to answer the incoming call, speaking in a low, measured voice while the quiet neighborhood remained frozen between relief and reflection. Nathaniel Brooks did not attempt to overhear the conversation. Instead, he thanked Sergeant Daniel Foster for handling the situation with professionalism once the facts became clear. Foster answered honestly. Judge Brooks, I only wish those facts had been confirmed sooner. Nathaniel nodded. That is exactly why procedures exist. They are meant to protect everyone, including officers. Tyler McKenna stood beside another patrol unit, listening without interrupting. The confidence that had marked his arrival had been replaced by careful silence. He understood that every word spoken from this point forward mattered. Marcus returned moments later and approached Nathaniel. Judge, the administrative office has requested a preliminary summary. They also confirmed that the Judicial Security Division will coordinate directly with the department during the review process. Nathaniel acknowledged the information with a simple nod. That is appropriate. Marcus continued, they are not asking for conclusions today. They want documentation, facts, and a complete timeline. Nathaniel smiled slightly. That is how every review should begin. Those nearby noticed that no one from the federal team spoke about punishment or revenge. Every conversation centered on documentation, procedure, and accountability. That quiet discipline contrasted sharply with the assumptions that had started the afternoon. Grace Holloway stepped closer to Nathaniel after receiving a reassuring glance from Sergeant Foster. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "I am so sorry this happened in front of your home." Nathaniel answered with kindness. "Thank you, Grace. What matters now is not what happened to me alone. What matters is whether everyone involved learns something valuable from today." His response spread quietly through the small crowd. A few neighbors who had recorded the incident exchanged thoughtful looks. One elderly resident admitted he had nearly accepted the original assumption simply because a police cruiser had stopped in front of the house. Another neighbor quietly confessed that he had almost walked back inside without asking questions. Nathaniel listened carefully before replying, "Authority deserves respect, but facts deserve verification. Those two principles must always exist together." The statement lingered long after he finished speaking. Meanwhile, Sergeant Foster received confirmation that the digital evidence had been successfully secured. The body camera recording, dispatch audio, and incident log had all been preserved according to departmental policy. Foster looked toward Tyler. "The review will examine everything from the first dispatch transmission until the final report. Accuracy now matters more than speed." Tyler nodded silently. He understood there would be no opportunity to reshape the timeline because every moment had already been recorded. Then an unexpected development quietly shifted the atmosphere once again. The teenager who had filmed much of the encounter approached Foster and politely explained that his phone had captured the conversation from the moment Tyler first walked onto the property. He offered to provide a copy if investigators believed it would help establish the complete sequence of events. Foster thanked him and accepted his contact information. Nathaniel watched the exchange with quiet approval. Independent evidence often strengthened public confidence because it showed events from more than one perspective. As the federal vehicles prepared to leave, Marcus opened the rear passenger door for Nathaniel. Just before stepping inside, Nathaniel glanced back at his front porch, the same place where the afternoon had begun with misunderstanding and ended with truth. At that exact moment, Sergeant Foster's phone vibrated again. He read the newest message, looked slowly toward Tyler, and said in a calm voice, "Internal Affairs has just informed me that today's recording closely resembles concerns raised in an earlier citizen complaint that had remained unresolved until now." Several weeks passed before the official reviews reached their conclusion, but for the people living on that quiet street, the lesson had begun long before any report was finalized. The recordings from the patrol vehicle, the body camera, the dispatch center, and the independent videos provided by neighbors were examined together, creating a complete timeline that left very little open to interpretation. Investigators focused not only on what had happened, but also on why certain decisions had been made before basic facts had been verified. Sergeant Daniel Foster fully cooperated with every request, determined that the department would learn from the incident instead of simply moving beyond it. Officer Tyler McKenna also participated in the review process. He answered questions honestly, acknowledged the choices he had made, and accepted that every decision made while wearing a badge carried lasting consequences. The department later confirmed that the earlier unresolved complaint would be reopened alongside the events of that afternoon so investigators could determine whether similar patterns existed. Nathaniel Brooks never attempted to influence the outcome. He declined interviews, avoided public attention, and returned to his judicial responsibilities with the same quiet professionalism that had defined his career for decades. When colleagues asked how he had remained so composed, he answered with a simple truth. "Our character is tested most when someone else forgets theirs." That sentence quietly spread through courthouse hallways, police training sessions, and community meetings. Grace Holloway continued tending the flowers outside her home, but she often found herself reflecting on how quickly appearances could shape assumptions. The teenager who had recorded the encounter later volunteered at several local community events promoting respectful dialogue between residents and law enforcement, explaining that transparency protected everyone when facts were allowed to speak. Sergeant Foster introduced additional reminders during patrol briefings about verifying information before acting whenever circumstances safely allowed, emphasizing that professionalism began with observation rather than assumption. Those conversations became part of a larger effort to strengthen public trust, one interaction at a time. Months later, Nathaniel returned home after another ordinary workday. The same porch welcomed him with the familiar creak of its wooden boards, the same flag moved gently in the evening breeze, and the same neighbors waved as they walked past. The place where misunderstanding had briefly overshadowed dignity once again became nothing more than the front porch of a quiet family home. Nathaniel paused before opening the door and looked across the peaceful neighborhood. He did not think about titles, recognition, or authority. He thought about responsibility. Every person carried it in different ways. Some wore robes. Some wore uniforms. Some simply watched from across the street. Yet all shared the same obligation to see one another as human beings before anything else. The events of that afternoon had never truly been about one federal magistrate or one police officer. They had been about a choice that every community faces every single day. Whether to let assumptions write the first chapter, or to let facts tell the whole story. As the evening sun settled beyond the trees, Nathaniel quietly stepped inside his home, closing the front door behind him with the same calm dignity he had carried from the very beginning, leaving behind one lasting truth that echoed far beyond that neighborhood. A badge may represent authority, but only fairness earns trust, and justice is strongest when every person is seen before they are judged.